Well, good evening, everyone. We're in Brussels at a pivotal time. Stability in Europe hangs in the balance. And the international rules-based order that's critical to maintaining peace and security is being put to the test by Russia's unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin's attacks are inflicting an ever-increasing toll on civilians there. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Ukrainians have been killed, many more wounded, as have citizens of other countries. More than 1 million refugees have fled Ukraine to neighboring countries. Millions of people across Ukraine are trapped in increasingly dire conditions as Russia destroys more critical infrastructure. For example, Mariupol's mayor says that most of the besieged city's residents are living without water, without electricity, without heat. Bridges to the city have been destroyed. Women, children, growing ranks of wounded civilians cannot get out. Food and medical supplies cannot get in. The mayor wrote today, and I quote, "We are simply being destroyed." The world has seen Russia use these grisly tactics before, in Syria, in Chechnya. Meanwhile, Russia's reckless operation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant risked a catastrophe, a nuclear incident. The Kremlin should immediately cease all attacks around Ukrainian nuclear facilities and allow civilian personnel to do their work to ensure the facility's safety and security, as both the IAEA Director General and a resolution adopted yesterday by the agency's Board of Governors have called on Russia to do. The Ukrainian people and government continue to show remarkable courage in defending their country, defending their freedom, defending one another. We said that if President Putin invaded Ukraine, we would increase our support for Ukraine's ability to defend itself while imposing swift and severe costs on the Kremlin. That's exactly what the United States and our allies and partners are doing. That was the focus of our ministerial meetings today with NATO allies, with the G7, with the European Union, as well as in my discussions with NATO Secretary General, with the EU Commission President von der Leyen, with the EU Council President Michel. We want our alliances to be strong enough to meet any threat. That's why from day one, President Biden made reinvigorating and re-energizing our alliances and partnerships the foundation of our foreign policy. It's why, as Secretary of State, I've come to Brussels, home to NATO and the EU, more than to any other world capital. And that's why we invested so much effort in finding new ways and coalitions to bring allies and partners together. Now we're seeing why that work matters. At NATO, we were joined by the ministers of Finland and Sweden, the EU High Representative Josep Borrell, the foreign ministers of Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and Canada, as well as the Secretary General Stoltenberg, also took part in our meeting with the EU. Never before have NATO and the European Union and other partner nations worked so closely together. This is a new kind of cooperation, and we'll bring this to bear not just in this crisis, but in the years to come. And our European allies and partners are stepping up to lead in unprecedented ways. For the first time, NATO has activated and deployed parts of its response force. Several NATO allies, including the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Spain, France, have sent troops and aircraft and ships to reinforce the alliance's eastern flank. Every NATO ally is providing either military or humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Most are providing both. For the first time, the European Union is financing the purchase and delivery of military assistance to a country under attack. The bloc swiftly adopted the biggest sanctions package in history against Russia. And the EU has granted immediate refuge to Ukrainians and others who call Ukraine home, the first time it has invoked this protection mechanism. Individual countries are also taking extraordinary steps. Germany is doubling its defense spending. Poland has opened its arms to more than 500,000 Ukrainian refugees. Switzerland set aside its tradition of neutrality to adopt the European Union's sanctions on Russia. The list goes on. These and other efforts by our European allies to deepen their own capabilities and cooperation do not undermine the transatlantic security alliance, they deepen our collective might. As recently as a few weeks ago, some questioned whether if the regional or international rules-based order came under threat, whether our European allies and partners would be willing to shoulder their fair share of the burden, the risk, the cost to defend it. In the last 9 days, European countries have demonstrated they are more than ready to stand up and stand together. And the United States is standing with Europe, pursuing complementary actions and policies in close coordination with our allies and partners. To give just a few examples, we've deployed an additional 7,000 troops to Europe and repositioned our forces already on the continent to strengthen NATO's eastern flank. We continue to tighten our severe economic sanctions on Russia. Last night, as I think you know, we extended temporary protective status to tens of thousands of Ukrainians living in the United States. And the President has requested an additional $10 billion from Congress to deliver more humanitarian, security, and economic assistance in Ukraine and the surrounding region over the coming days and weeks. Yesterday, President Putin said his so-called special military operation is proceeding exactly as planned. Well, it's hard to imagine that his plan included inspiring the Ukrainian people to defend their country with such tenacity, strengthening the resolve and solidarity of NATO and the EU, uniting the world in opposition to Moscow, including 141 countries at the United Nations, an unprecedented number of international businesses, associations, cultural institutions that have cut ties with Russia, causing the Russian economy to go into free fall, motivating tens of thousands of Russians to protest and countless more to leave the country, and increasingly turning Russia into a pariah state. If that was President Putin's plan, well, you can say it's working. Russia has never been so isolated. We have never been more united. But let me reiterate one thing, because it's very important. We take these actions not because we oppose the Russian people. We do not. We regret that tens of millions of Russians will suffer because of the dangerous decisions made by a tiny circle of corrupt leaders and their cronies who have consistently put their interests above those of the Russian people, who are doing everything they can to hide their war of choice from the Russian public. Today's discussion with NATO, the EU, the G7 affirmed that we're fully aligned on our goals and our determination to meet them. We'll deepen our support for Ukraine's brave defenders and for the Ukrainian civilians suffering as a result of the deepening humanitarian crisis. We'll continue to raise the cost for President Putin and all who carry out and enable his war of choice and the devastation that it's causing. We'll continue to strengthen our capacity to defend our collective security and deter further escalation by Russia, including by upholding our Article 5 commitment that an attack on one is an attack on all. NATO is a defensive alliance. We've never sought and will not seek conflict with Russia. But as President Biden has said, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. No one should doubt America's readiness or our resolve. At the same time, we'll keep open the door to dialogue and diplomacy, while making clear to the Kremlin that unless it changes course, it will continue down the road of increasing isolation and economic pain. And we'll support Ukraine in its talks with Russia to reach a ceasefire and the unconditional withdrawal of Russian forces, something that Foreign Minister Kuleba and I have been discussing on a daily basis. In the meantime, we are working urgently with the government of Ukraine, the ICRC, and others to create humanitarian corridors that will allow civilians to get out of Ukraine's besieged cities and to allow food, medicine, and other vital supplies to get in. Russia's attack created this humanitarian crisis. Now, all countries have a responsibility to pressure the Kremlin to alleviate at least some of the misery that it has wrought. Of all the consequences of Moscow's unprovoked attack, one of the most unexpected is the spark it has lit in people around the world who've come out to demonstrate for freedom, for the rights of Ukrainians. That includes valiant individuals in places where protesting the Kremlin's war means risking arrest, beatings, or worse, as thousands of Russians and Belarusians have done. For years, we've seen the dangerous tide rolling back democracy and human rights and undercutting the rules-based order, fueled in no small part by Moscow. With this brutal invasion, we, our European allies and partners, and people everywhere are being reminded of just how much is at stake. Now, we see the tide of democracy rising to the moment. With that, I'm happy to take some questions.